I tell you what, I do love that music on a Thursday morning. Kind of joy to the world. Willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to Property Quorum, the third in four property shows that Hamish and I run. Particularly interesting, this one today. It's, I suppose, in the rearview mirror of the Renters' Rights Act and where we are right now in the property market. It's an interesting time to be alive in the property market. I didn't say a good time, I said an interesting time. Property Quorum, a property for sale, a tenant at home, and of course, to start us up, as ever, Hamish McClay.
Well, good morning. As sort of Gareth indicates, by the time we get to this stage in the week where we have a podcast in the morning, we know there's not much of it left. But there's lots to do. There's lots to do. And one of those complicated things we have to sort of ruminate over is what, in fact, is going on within our sort of the housing market, what's actually going on with properties. And we see yet again the consequence of what is actually sort of happening when laws change, when ideas that aren't fully thought out necessarily are brought in, we get certain results coming through which the initiator never really thought about at the particular sort of time of it. So we've got a situation now where we're struggling an awful lot with our court system. We're struggling a lot. We've put tremendous imposition on landlords, making it very, very difficult for them right now. And of course, we've hit this particular sort of situation that we rely on landlords to make available housing for quite a significant number, well, for millions of people throughout the UK, because the landlords make up that difference, particularly private landlords. They make up that difference and make it possible for people to have a home. Now, unfortunately, we had the Renters' Rights Act, which, if you like, hasn't fully worked its way through, but we have situations now which is making it difficult for both landlords, and it's making it difficult too for the tenants who are in there. And instead of creating stability, which the Renters' Rights Act was meant to do, we've actually got complications that have crept in, which are bringing doubts to the tenants, are bringing doubts to the landlords, many of whom do still want to get rid of those particular properties. I say get rid of, that's a bit unfair. The time has arrived when they're thinking, right, time to sell the properties. And it does make a challenge. It adds a challenge. It's one of those things that whoever it is that go, it's the landlord has the challenge, the tenant has the challenge, the buyer has the challenge, the solicitors have the challenge. Where do we stop?
Well, where do we stop indeed? Was it Carry On Cleo? Infamy, they've all got it in for me. Silas, it's almost as if they hadn't thought through what the consequences of their actions might have been.
Imagine that, Gareth. Imagine somebody pushing for legislation and greater regulation to the market to then have some very unintended consequences unfolding afterwards. But I think this is there's some very serious things that haven't been addressed actually in the marketplace. And I'll take you back in time to when I was an estate agent, and you'd be trying to sell properties, and your ideal buyer for any property was usually somebody who was sitting in rental accommodation because they usually sold a property or they were first-time buyers, and you knew that, we could line everything up, we could exchange contracts a month later, they could move into the property.
No change, cash buyer, everything in place.
Absolute dream buyer. And now, if you look at that same equation, we have a very fragmented property market where property sales are taking a lot longer to go through. And so there's little certainty, should I say, in terms of the tenant then giving notice on their accommodation. So we're now looking at a 2-month period, not 1 month, where the tenant has to give notice in order to vacate their property and then move into the one that they're thinking about buying. And I don't think that's been particularly well thought through. Perhaps the government, in their infinite wisdom, thought that they were giving tenants more security, but I don't think it's really helping the housing market. The other thing, of course, is landlords have been selling a lot of properties. They've finally had enough. They see that the pendulum has swung very much in favour of the tenant, to the point where rogue tenants are almost impossible to get out, or anybody who wants to game the system is almost impossible to get out. And then there's this crazy rule around a 12-month no reletting period. So let's say, for example, a landlord's finally at the end of his tether, or her tether. They're getting on into their 60s. They finally decided to cash in their pension. They've served notice on the tenant. The tenant has vacated. They put the property up for sale. Now we're entering into what is undoubtedly more of a buyer's market. Fewer properties are selling. I can tell you there's a glut of properties that have come up by us, which are perfect first-time buyers or perfect rental properties, and I was expecting them to be snapped up. And they're sitting on the market. They've been sat on the market for probably the best part of 6 months now.
Why is that? Because I've noticed that as well.
Well, you have to ask the question, what's going on with the wider economy? But the point being, tenants were kicked out of those properties and they had to go somewhere. Now, any landlord who might then change their mind going, you know, I can't keep paying out a mortgage with no rental income. The property's not selling. The economy's getting worse. The property market's getting worse. I'd like to relet them. There's this crazy 12-month no reletting rule, which takes a property out of housing stock for at least 12 months, whether we like it or not.
What is the purpose of that? Can you think of the raison behind it? It makes no sense.
Well, the only thing I can think of is some bright spark has sat there and gone, well, if we make it a disincentive to sell, then it will keep tenants in properties longer, perhaps. But you have to ask the question, who's really doing this thinking? Is there any sort of joined up thinking in the process? Because now you've knocked out, I mean, just by us alone, it's not much, but on one stretch of the main road, probably a dozen
I think you're being charitable to use the word thinking there.
Yes, quite right. And so, you know, there's a dozen tenants there, families, let's be honest, young families most likely. And these landlords, as we saw in the Property 118 survey, they're older people. They're people that don't have to keep taking the batterings off the change in legislation. They've washed their hands of it. I've had enough. I'm out. Everybody else will have to deal with the consequences. And I think the things that should have been addressed, which is the minority of landlords who are bad. There's no two ways about it. Some are selling slum accommodation to tenants. They shouldn't be allowed to rent property. Absolutely. There are also a fair number of bad tenants who will move into a place, never pay any rent, trash the place, leave landlords with tens of thousands of pounds worth of bills, game the system, know exactly what to say in front of the judge, and can carry on living there rent-free for an extended period of time. Those are the sorts of things that ought to have been addressed. But like anybody pushing for more legislation, that seems to have been swept under the rug for a piece of legislation that just isn't having the intended purpose.
It's just me, but wouldn't it have played bigger dividends long term if we went for a middle path rather than going for one extreme or the other? It seems that if you look back historically, we swing our legislation and our heavy-handedness from either all the way through for the land or all the way through the tenants. Come on, guys, find a compromise position.
You would think that would be the case, wouldn't you? I mean, many years ago, I've come across properties where a tenant is in there for life, and a tenant can gift that property onto future generations, and they are paying quite literally a peppercorn rent. So they have a country property, they're paying £25 a year maybe to live in that property, and for some reason, the way that tenancy was construed, they're allowed to gift that to future generations. Now, you could argue from the landlord's perspective that's really not helpful unless you're working on the farm or working on the estate in exchange for rent. Then that sort of ties up housing stock for generations at a figure that's unworkable, and you can't maintain and look after a property at that sort of level. And now we've seen the advent of buy-to-let, which was great, solved the government's housing problem because they got the private sector to take it on, and that seems to be working for, you know, probably the best part of 20 odd years. But
now that's almost untenable.
But now somebody's come along and said, yeah, we don't want that anymore.
No. We're bad people for having that. Now what we've got to do is make it almost impossible to either rent or sell your property, because the market is so flat at the moment, it's hard to sell it. So if you want to change your mind and get some money in so you can cover the expense of the mortgage, you can't do that.
Crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Make this make sense to me, Silas, please.
The only way that this makes sense to me personally is that, and the joined up thinking that I've done, and you can call me crazy, but if you were pushing the market into the hands of corporate landlords, this would absolutely be the way to do it. Those that have got the firepower to sit there for months and months and months working things through the legal system. You've got an army of lawyers who know the law inside and out and that can, deal with tenants gaming the system. Maybe this system works for the corporates. But it certainly doesn't work for the mom and pop landlords, of which there are hundreds of thousands across the country, providing a very valuable role, that have had tenants in properties for years, never put the rent up, always take care of the maintenance issues, had a really good tenant landlord relationship, and that is now being pushed out. So that's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Hamish, are we turning into Germany, where the corporate landlord is quite prevalent?
No, not necessarily. However, it is making it much, much easier for the landlords, the corporate landlord, to be able to afford it. Or in addition to that, we're getting ourselves into a particular sort of position where it's very easy for a landlord overseas to invest in property in the UK. And I think this can sometimes be a difficult challenge. Is what we call that absent landlord scenario. They're not in the country. They're not actually keeping a pace with what is necessarily sort of happening at the property. They don't know what needs to be updated. They're not necessarily in a position to be able to look after their clients as effectively as the law suggests they now have to. And it's one of those difficult situations. Nobody has actually sort of looked, when you take on board like somebody from abroad, they don't know the ramifications of the regulations that are coming through. I think that's the challenge about it. Whereas, of course, the corporate landlords are thinking, yummy, yummy, yummy. This is absolutely great. They can afford, as Silas has explained in the past, the corporate landlord can afford to have properties empty.
Of course.
Because all they do when somebody actually comes in, they go, "Oh, there's a shame. It's going to cost you an extra £500 a month now to actually rent that property." So they're going to reclaim it anyway because the additional, so they don't miss it if there are vacant properties as far as they're actually sort of concerned. And in some cases, the corporate landlords are quite happy to have them leave them empty because they know the value of the property.
Right.
Compared to when they bought it, particularly they bought it pre-lockdown.
We're encouraging corporatization. We're encouraging.
Oh, we are encouraging it,
right.
But it's not. I mean, what it is, and it's sort of quite interesting.
We've had a comment, which is it's the beginning of communism. I would argue it's the diametric opposite of that. It's the encouragement of fascism, because fascism wants to devolve power from the people to the corporates. And that seems to be the encouragement now is for big foreign companies to gobble up sectors of our property and then rent it out in a faceless, nameless way to whoever can afford to pay the extremely high rent.
Well, it's a little bit like when you look at sort of countries like Iran and Sudan, their population don't pay rent. By and large, they don't have to because of the system, because the properties are owned by the state.
Right.
The state, they bought all the properties, they built all the properties because they built it from the oil revenues. The only big problem about it is they're beginning to run out of things for the massively increased population to look after to actually sort of live in their properties now. So basically, they've got a big challenge sort of coming forth, which is probably why we are actually, and Europe generally, is getting more and more of these people moving out of these countries, which are effectively sort of communist style of running it,
I wouldn't
they're
call that-
actually moving into Europe and sort of come to wherever they can actually sort of come to. But it's also creating a sort of situation where it does make it sort of harder for, like that first time buyer, for example. If the property's got a sitting tenant, how can that first time buyer get into that property with a sitting tenant? Because sorry, they want to get in the property themselves.
Right.
So there's an awful lot of sort of things within it that there ought to be. And unfortunately, wherever we look, even those local councils who would like to be doing things about it, they are so limited because they just don't have the finance to do it.
Yes.
So we brought in regulation. Regulation has consequences, and the consequences are causing the challenges, and they often will cause as many difficult situations as those that they resolve.
So, Silas, same question to you. Is this the beginning of communism, or is it just fascism with a shiny new coat?
I was kind of hoping you wouldn't ask me this question, Gareth, but I saw the comment come in and I thought, you know what? I think there's more truth in that than we like to believe. And the conspiracy theorists will love this one. But I think it was in 2020, there was a video that came around from the World Economic Forum, and it was something along the lines of, you'll own nothing and be happy. And it's this whole idea that as consumers, we would actually rent everything. So we'd rent the cars, we'd rent our houses, we'd rent essentially almost our clothes. And there was a kind of online uproar about this whole thing as to, well, who actually would then own everything? Because somebody must own it in order for you to rent it, right? And it seems to be devolving private ownership more back towards the state or corporations. And I do think there is this.
Well, the difference between the two is, if it's to the state, it's communist. If it's to private corporations, it's fascist. Which way do you think?
And I put whatever label we want to put on it, but you can't help but notice the creeping technocracy that we're sort of being pushed into.
I agree with that. Definitely.
We have a situation where we've got big American companies now deeply embedded into our NHS. We have to, raise questions about what's happening with their data sharing, etc. Where does this all lead? The one thing that bothers me, and I don't know whether I should say this on a public forum because people will probably think I'm nuts, but if that's the end goal, okay, you'll own nothing and be happy. In order to get to that point, there has to be significant financial distress in order to get people to give up their assets.
Yeah, there has to be a vacuum of some sort.
Correct. And so then I look at what's happening in the stock markets, and I look at what's happening in the overall economies. Our economies of the West are largely going backwards. They're stalling right now. Is the next 5 years going to bring a situation where we are going to see significant economic unraveling? It's quite possible. They say that we have a recession every 7 to 10 years and a depression once in every 100 years. And our last depression was 1929. So we're kind of about due. Is that the point where they ride in on their white knights and say, or their white horse and say, you can give up all your debt in exchange for your assets? I don't know.
Wow. Okay. So here we are. Christine, friend of the show, in 1 year alone, NatWest reportedly bought over 50,000 properties. Or is it 50,000 pounds? No, it'd be 50,000 properties. And then there is BlackRock hoovering up. Scary times. There's surely a conflict of interest when banks who provide mortgages own property. Well, there isn't. Surely there is a conflict of interest, Christine. Another friend of the show, Zara Olibokas, great word, technocracy. Every time the state gets control, we end up with a mess. Well, yes, but it's because I think, Zara, they're not specialists on any of this. They're they're sort of vaguely knowledgeable on it, and it's the equivalent of someone who isn't a lawyer, doesn't really know the law, trying to finagle their way through a property transaction, one might suggest. You could probably get there, but there'll be lots of things missed, lots of loopholes left open. Thank you once again to everyone who's contributed. Thank you, Silas. Very useful. Hamish, would you care to take us home?
Right. Well, again, awkward situation. We've obviously got to find a way through it, and hopefully there will be enough of the experts out there who actually know what they can do with the finance, because strangely enough, there is some finance available for certain things. I mean, okay, we know the government, right? I mean, they have a way of sort of pulling things out of the hat that all of us, oh, we can afford to do that.
Don't they just hit the print button on the
yeah,
print?
but the trouble is, it's largely for totally unnecessary things that the marketplace ought to be able to resolve anyway. But they'll throw money at it. Again, it makes them that much more popular. Oh, crikey, it's Thursday today as well, isn't it? Oh dear. But unfortunately, we've got another situation, and I think what it is, because we're getting hit with those punches all of the time, I think it's very difficult to recover from the one punch. This is it, whether we were fit or not. It's difficult to recover from that one punch before the next one arrives in. And I think that's what's happening in society. That's what's happening with our property market. And that's what's happening with properties generally.
Wow. Thank you so much for playing a part in today's tawdry excuse for a show, Silas. We really let them have it, I think. We're still as confused as when we started. Seems unfair. Hamish, thank you once again for having set this up in the first place. And thank all of you guys for watching. If you found this amusing and interesting, I'm hoping tomorrow is going to be more of the same, except tomorrow with cladding matters, which is the biggest bun fight of the week. Please do come along to that, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Do be there. And if you want to catch up on any of the previous shows, including other property quorums, please go to Spilling the Proper Tea, excuse the pun, which is on YouTube, where we got them all there for you. But until tomorrow, until next week, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, and in these particularly interesting times, look after the mental health. Bye-bye now.